I've had a few people ask for my take on Three Identical Strangers, and honestly, what fascinated me most wasn't just that three identical brothers found each other. It was what happened after they did. When Bobby, Eddie, and David discovered each other, their connection was immediate. They had similar mannerisms, similar interests, and this almost instant sense of recognition. I think that moment is so powerful because it speaks to something humans are wired for: belonging. One thing we talk about in therapy is that our identity develops through relationships. We learn who we are partly through the people around us, the stories we're told about ourselves, and the places where we feel like we fit. So imagine spending your entire life without knowing a major part of your own story, and then suddenly discovering there are two other people who share such a significant part of your identity. But what I found even more interesting is that the story didn't end with the reunion. A lot of people look at this documentary and immediately go to the nature versus nurture debate. Are we shaped more by our genetics or by our environment? But from a family systems perspective, that question is much more complicated. These three brothers shared genetics, but they also grew up in different families with different parenting styles, different expectations, different relationships, and different experiences that shaped who they became. Genetics matter, environment matters, relationships matter, but human development is created through all of those things interacting together. Another piece that stood out to me was the grief involved. When the brothers learned they had been intentionally separated as children, there wasn't just a loss of the relationship they could have had. There was also a loss of the story they believed about themselves and their childhood. This is where the concept of ambiguous loss becomes really important. Sometimes we grieve things that aren't completely gone or things we never got to have in the first place. The relationship exists, but there's also grief for the years that were missed and the parts of ourselves that we never had the opportunity to know. This is also where I think this documentary connects to a much larger conversation we have in adoption and child welfare. Children are not just blank slates who can simply be placed into new environments and expected to move forward without questions about where they came from. Their history, their relationships, and their identity are all part of their story. When important pieces of a child's story are intentionally hidden or removed, we have to consider what that means for their ability to understand themselves. Children deserve safety, but they also deserve access to the truth of their own lives whenever that information can be safely provided. The ethical questions in this documentary are also incredibly important. Separating siblings for the purpose of research raises questions about informed consent, autonomy, and whether people have the right to know information that fundamentally impacts their identity and relationships. Spoiler alert, they do. One of the hardest parts of this story is that there isn't a simple answer. It isn't just about nature versus nurture. It isn't just about the reunion. It isn't just about the research. It's also about what happens when the people most impacted by a story are not the ones who have control over that story. Throughout the documentary, the brothers expressed a desire to understand what happened to them and to share the truth of their experience. At the same time, they described encountering powerful systems and people who had reasons to minimize, hide, or silence parts of what happened. That raises a much bigger question. Who gets to decide what someone has a right to know about their own life? This is one of the reasons this story connects so deeply to conversations around adoption and child welfare. Decisions made during childhood can shape a person's identity for the rest of their life, which means we have to think carefully about who has the power to make those decisions and what information people may need in order to understand themselves. One of the most complicated parts of this documentary is watching people try to make sense of a reality they never consented to. How do you pick up the pieces of a life that was shaped by decisions made without your knowledge? How do you rebuild your understanding of yourself when parts of your story were kept from you? That's why this story stays with so many people. It reminds us that our stories are not just information. They're part of our identity, our relationships, and our understanding of who we are.